How can you put a price on just image and coolness? Because I don't think there are very many other cars out there that are just as cool as these.
Now, I haven't seen Adam's bid for this video yet, and I've got a sneaking suspicion he absolutely loves this car. Personally, I think they're an intolerable death trap. And mechanically speaking, well, yeah, interesting.
The constant jiggling about, it kind of forces you to lock in your core. It's a bit like a workout, and that's really good for you. Okay, yeah, look, we understand. These are impossibly cool, and they're also about as simple and as honest as a modern-ish car can be. But should you ever seriously consider buying a used Suzuki Sierra or Samurai? Early examples of this generation are over 40 years old these days. Even the most recent ones are nearly 30 years old. So no matter how appealing they might be, surely buying one is just way too much of a risk, right? Well, that's exactly what we are here to find out. What is involved in buying one of these things? How about we start with what can go wrong with them? And yep, you guessed it, kicking off the exterior, we have to talk about rust, which, if left unchecked, can kill these. The areas to check are the floors, the door bottoms, the sills, the roof gutters, around any of the glass, and especially around the windscreen. Some owners have also found some rust forming in and around the wheel arches, and actually all over the entire car, really. But in what might actually be some good news, a lot of Sierras that are on the used market won't have rust issues because plenty of owners are genuine enthusiasts and they keep on top of this sort of thing. Plus, apparently the rust that can form, according to the owners, is generally pretty easy and cheap to fix. Actually, for that, there are plenty of great tutorials and advice on owners groups and forums and on YouTube. Actually, this brings us to a really important point. The community around these cars is absolutely phenomenal. There are dozens of owners groups on Reddit and on Facebook, but if you want to do a really deep dive, we cannot recommend ozzukas.com highly enough. The advice, the knowledge they've got on there, and the tutorials, absolutely priceless. Actually, you know what? We're going to add a link to ozzukas.com down below because it's a must check out website if you're buying one of these. Next up, if the car has spent its entire life living just out in the sun and hasn't been cleaned or polished on a regular basis, you can expect the clear coat or even the paint to have seen far better days. And the same can be said with anything made of plastic or rubber as well. But you got to remember, it's a 30-year-old car. This is Australia. Things like this are going to wear and tear. Although in saying that, if it has been garaged most of its life and cared for regularly, it can age really, really well. Next up, and look, this goes for really any four-wheel drive, but make sure you get underneath and look for any signs of abuse or damage under there. Obviously, being an off-roader, you can expect some scratches, that's fine. But if the frame's been damaged or there's a cross member that's like folded over on itself, yeah, don't buy that car. And look, the same goes for modifications. Chances are any Sierra these days is going to feature some level of mods. But look, we'd just be sticking with examples that have quality modifications that have been fitted correctly and if need be, have been engineered for the car. Now look, the reason we're saying that is because, at least here in New South Wales, the authorities are really cracking down on illegal modifications. We know of scenarios where Sierras have been bought and that's been great for 6 to 7 months or whatever. Then the owner goes to re-register the car, but they can't re-register it because technically it's illegal, and that's a bloody nightmare. Now next up, make sure you check the condition of the bushes and the struts, actually the entire suspension setup, even if it has a lift kit, because plenty of these, by this age and time, this stuff has probably seen better days. But the good news here is, there are so many aftermarket options out there. In fact, for the entire car, the aftermarket accessory scene for these is huge. Even when it comes to simple parts like lights here or door locking mechanisms, all of this stuff is so easy to work on, and parts should be pretty accessible and should be affordable. Now, I am saying should be affordable because sometimes some of the OEM stuff can be a little bit on the expensive side, but it's important to know that Maruti in India were making these up until 2019. So occasionally, hunting for parts online can be your friend. Although in saying that, some of the quality of some of these parts can be, let's say, questionable. In fact, we'd recommend only sticking with parts that have at least a fitment guarantee and a full manufacturer's warranty. And the same goes for aftermarket accessories like bar work and lights and lift kits, and even interior stuff like infotainment systems and replacement speakers. Actually, for any of this stuff, you've got to check out our mates at Automotive Superstore, because that way you're going to know you're getting the right parts for your car, and everything comes with actual backup support. Check them out, the link's below. They're mates of ours, they're bloody awesome. But If you're actually in the market for one of these, you may have discovered that just trying to work out which model of Sierra is going to suit you best can be an absolute nightmare. Even some of the owners and fans of these can't seem to decide even what this generation's even called. So let's try to decipher the confusion. We're going to try our best, okay? Here we go. First of all, depending on where you're watching this from, chances are it's going to be called a Sierra or a Samurai. However, it might also be called about a dozen other names. And these names will sometimes vary depending on where the car was even made. Because initially manufacturing was done in Japan, where the Sierra met K car regulations. But over the production cycle, Spain, Thailand, Indonesia, Pakistan, India, Kenya, and Colombia all had shots at building this little four-wheel drive. And we're talking about models made between 1981 and 1998, which some claim to be the second generation of the Sierra, but then other owners and fans, they disagree with this, and apparently it should be called the SJ generation. However, no matter what it's called, these things during the production cycle went through, let's say, 4 main phases or configurations. Sort of. Originally, it arrived here in Australia as the SJ40 with a narrow body packing a 1-litre 4-cylinder engine. Next came the SJ50, swapping in a 1.3-litre and a schmancy new plastic dash. The SJ70 arrived later in 1988 with a wider track, updated interior, and a number of mechanical changes, like the inclusion of electronic fuel injection with its new 1.3-litre engine in 1991. And interestingly, this EFI version of the SJ70 is often regarded as being the pick of this generation of Sierra. Although plenty of other owners call bullshit on that, let's see the argument start in the comments now. And finally, we have the SJ80 from 1996 that swapped out the leaf springs for coils and solid axles, and this improved the Sierra's on-road handling and general comfort and refinement. However, even now, owners and fans still seem to be divided between if the leaf springs or the coils are the better choice. And then, in addition to all of this, you then have the choice of 5 body styles, and thanks to various state distributors for Suzuki at the time, even what variants are called and what they include can vary from state to state. But that's not all. After Suzuki Japan ended long wheelbase production, Maruti from India supplied long wheelbase Sierras to Australia under the Stockman name, and these have been available in narrow track with the 1-litre engine or wide track with the 1.3, not to mention the availability of various grey import models from Japan. And all of that means that the pricing on the used market can vary dramatically. At the lowest end of the spectrum, and we are talking about Sierras that are registered and can be driven on the road, pricing kicks off from around about $3,000. At the other end of the spectrum, the very most you should pay is about $18,000, which, yes, that does seem like a lot of money for a vehicle like this, but you know, it might be a future classic one day. Also, how can you put a price on just image and coolness? Because I don't think there are very many other cars out there that are just as cool as these. Also, has any other car ever been as masculine as these? What I mean by that is that, unfortunately, sometimes those that are driving like a Toyota Hilux or a Ford Ranger Raptor or maybe a Toyota Tundra or a Ram 1500, there can be accusations made that maybe they're compensating for a lack of weaponry in the pants department, or maybe they've got some self-esteem issues going on. But with these, no other car has screamed that there is no compensation going on here. Plus, the current Jimny is a massive sales success, and that's because it's a modern take on this absolutely classic design. And for me, I think this entire design is highlighted by the awesome graphics. Manufacturers, can we start bringing exterior graphics back? Because they're just fun, so damn cool. But inside, what's going on in here? Well, honestly, not a whole lot. It is a sea of hard plastics and vinyl, as it should be, because it makes it easier to clean and more robust. But in terms of common interior issues, there are hardly any. Okay, look, because it is all hard plastics and the Australian climate can be very, very harsh, and if it's been flogged its entire life, you can expect few of the plastic components to maybe get a bit brittle and maybe break. And also because of this, these interiors are renowned for being a bit rattly on rough roads, but in saying all of that, plenty of owners just complimented how robust these interiors are. Actually, we're going to bet that if you put a current AMG G-Wagon or a Land Rover Defender through 30 years of the Australian climate and off-roading and just abuse all the time, there's no way those cars' interiors are going to age as well as these. Although, just be aware that if something in here does break and you need to replace it, depending on where it was built, sometimes some of the build tolerances can be a little bit on the loose side, so you might buy an OEM part, but it will never really fit perfectly. Actually, something that you will need to replace, especially if you enjoy music or podcasts, is the infotainment system. Weirdly, these never came standard with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. They also didn't have reverse parking sensors or 360-degree cameras or any of that kind of tech. A lot of that stuff, Automotive Superstore will hook you up. Also, aside from the infotainment system, this may shock you, but there's also no multi-zone climate control, unless you wind one window down and leave the other window up. There's no ventilated or heated seats, and they don't have 10-way power adjustments. Even the air conditioning on the models that had air conditioning, it's not even centered. Actually, just a quick tip on the air conditioning, seriously, a lot of the cars that have air conditioning, that was a dealer-fitted accessory, and a lot of owners are having issues with those air conditioning systems. It's not going to send you bankrupt, but it can be a little bit more complex to fit than you might anticipate. But aside from that, because nothing in here is really power operated, everything's kind of mechanical, nothing really goes wrong because you're not relying on electronics and computers. However, the lack of features in here does extend to the safety features, or I should say the lack of safety features. In fact, this is arguably what killed the Samurai stateside. In 1996, Consumer Reports in the US published an article stating that the little Suzuki was a prime example of a not acceptable safety hazard, claiming it was a dangerous rollover risk. This tanked sales of the Samurai, and shortly after, Suzuki left the United States for good. However, after further investigation in an ensuing legal battle between Suzuki and Consumer Reports, evidence showed that the test may have been manipulated to ensure a rollover result, and that report could be seen as biased and misleading. Still, compared to the levels of safety that we expect today in modern cars, these things are about as safe as base jumping. Chances are you're going to be okay, but just pray nothing goes wrong. Actually, something that will hopefully help you avoid having an accident in the first place is having a clear windscreen, and the best way to achieve that is by having a set of Wipertech wiper blades. These are the only wiper blades we personally choose to use. They're so easy to order online, they're a breeze to fit, and when you order yourself a set via the link below, you're going to get 15% off and free express shipping. Although, don't do any of that if you're going to do what Adrian has done and lend us your car to feature, because if you lend us your car, like this Sierra, we're going to give you a set for free as a thank you present. But what is the interior like to actually live with? First of all, getting in and out is a breeze because the doors, they have no springs to them, so they just open and close very easily. And also they sound cool opening and closing. Then once you're inside, the seats, they're so comfortable and they're a little bit supportive as well. Positioning, body positioning, not too bad. I'm on the tall side, but I fit back here quite nicely. Because the car's tiny, everything is nice and close to get to. Design-wise, I love the dials, very retro. The lack of airbag doesn't exactly fill you with confidence. And even though everything in here is plastic, it all feels really like, it feels solid. Then as far as practicality goes, you've got a cute little glove box in here. You've got a shelf down here specifically for your red electrical tape. You've got another little storage bin up here. I don't know what that's for. You do have a cigarette lighter and an ashtray because, you know, the car's from the 1980s and back then they didn't know that smoking was going to kill you. There's an aftermarket cup holder here that Adrian thoughtfully has had like a little flappy bit there so it will hold one of my small pretentious coffees. No door bins because that would eat into leg room. That's about it for practicality. Nothing under there. Obviously no sunglasses holder because it's got a vinyl roof. Nothing under the seats. It's actually pretty good practicality for a car of this size. Now here's a fun fact for you. Did you know I'm exactly 1 centimeter shorter than very handsome actor and DJ Idris Elba, and he is of Sierra Leone descent? Get it? Suzuki Sierra, Sierra Leone, both Sierras. Anyway, what will surprise you is how comfortable these back seats are. Okay, legs are crushed a little bit, but the seat comfort is quite nice. The recline position, I feel sort of relaxed because Adrian has fitted a roll cage. I've got a bit of an armrest here. This is like a really relaxed position to be in. I was expecting to be crushed back here. It's pretty comfy. But in saying that, as far as features and practicality back here, no, nothing. But unfortunately, that's not it for concerns back here because let's just say that getting into one of these often doesn't require a key. In this one, to get in the boot, you just pop these up the zip and you're inside. Even the door locks, a screwdriver will get you in there and will probably get the car started. So if you are buying one, make sure you budget for some kind of aftermarket security system because this is a theft risk. Then as far as practicality in the boot goes, yeah, not exactly the car's strong suit, not a lot of room back here with the rear seats in place. However, these do fold forward and tumble like so. So then you actually have, this is an okay amount of space. Plenty of owners also remove these rear seats and that'll give you even more space, more room for activities. But remember, there are long wheelbase models of these, and if you've ever visited Southeast Asia, you'll see long wheelbase Sierras carrying everything from aquariums full of fish to clearly way too many bales of hay. In fact, I was in Vietnam and I saw one of the aquariums on the back of one of these, and it was amazing. And even in New Zealand, there was a variant called the Farm Worker, and it was designed specifically for, well, farm work. In fact, you couldn't actually register it for public road use, it was just for farms. Now, before we get into driving this little beast, we need your help with something. It turns out that of everybody that watches our videos, about 75% don't subscribe to ReDriven. Does this sound like you? If it does, please hit that subscribe button because it helps us out so much and it allows us to make more free content for you. But if you really want to help us out, why not consider joining our membership program for a few more perks? Again, the link is down there. But if you're here purely to get information on the Sierra because you're considering buying one, make sure you hit the link below to take you to the ReDriven cheat sheet on the Sierra. It's completely free. We've listed out all the common issues with the car and more. It's an absolute must read if you're in the market. Okay, and now to driving these things. What are they like? Let's do the negatives first, but look, don't stress. There are very, very few. First of all, plenty of people complain about these things being a bit slow, and you know what? Yeah, they are really, really slow. Going up a hill will require a gear change down. And to give you an idea, 0 to 100k an hour is going to take around about 20 seconds, probably more. That's for the 1.3 litre. If we're talking the old school 1 litre, it may never get to 100 kilometers an hour, unless of course you're reaching terminal velocity after you've driven off a cliff. But you know what? I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, the car being slow, because I don't think a Sierra is the sort of car that should be fast. Many, many years ago, I drove one of these that had a Swift GTI engine swapped into it, and look, it was honestly terrifying to drive, and not in the fun way. Secondly, look, obviously you're not going to be expecting the levels of refinement and ride quality of a Rolls Royce, but as you can probably tell, yeah, this is pretty rough. In fact, it's so rough, we've actually had to turn the stabilization on in the camera you're watching this through now, and we've never had to do that before. But again, I kind of feel like that's all part of the fun and the charm of the car. It's kind of like the car is chatting to you the entire time, letting you know what's going on. You feel every single grain of sand on the road, and you're kind of constantly, you know, working together with the steering wheel to just keep the thing going in the direction that you initially intended. Also, the constant jiggling about, it kind of forces you to lock in your core, but then flex and move your body at your hips. So in a kind of weird way, it's a bit like a workout, and that's really good for you. It's also not only good for your mental health, but also the mental health of everyone around you, because driving one of these, it's impossible to not smile and laugh the entire time. It is so enjoyable. But then you look outside and you look at other motorists and pedestrians, and they're all smiling. This car is just good for society. Also, because it's so small and jacked up, actually living with it is wonderful, because like the vision out is great, because the A-pillars, I can pretty much wrap my hand around the A-pillar, so the vision forward is fantastic. You can see all of the extremities of the car so easily, so parking's great. But then because of the ride height, you never have to worry about speed humps or gutters or potholes or really anything. Okay, look, the lack of power steering, it can make parking or slow maneuvering a little bit more challenging, but because the entire car weighs about the same as a ham and cheese croissant, it's nowhere near as bad as you might expect. And then we come to the off-roading ability, and look, there's no need for me to repeat what has been said 1,000 times online and shown in endless YouTube videos. These things are so capable off-road. Even in completely stock form, these things can pull some amazing shapes off-road, but then fit some intelligent modifications, and there are trails that only a modified Sierra or maybe a Jimny will ever explore. That is, as long as the engine and transmission hold together. But I can't elaborate on that because I'm not a qualified mechanic, but luckily Jim is.
Now I'm going to go way back to the start here. The very early models of these had old school ignition points and carburetors, and they do take some special old school care. You've got to learn how to set the points and set the ignition timing, because at some point you're going to have to replace the points, the condenser, the rotor and the distributor cap, and set the timing. Now the carburetors, the accelerator pump plunger can fail and they can just leak, and the needle and seat can fail, and the float level can be wrong, and there's all sorts of carburetor things. So basically at some point they're going to need a carburetor overhaul. Now none of that is particularly difficult. It's highly likely that most mechanics under 40 years old won't know how to do it, so it's likely you're going to have to learn how. Now in saying that, I am very much over 40, and now I know I don't look it, right? But yeah, I remember how to do carbies and points. I actually didn't mind doing that. It was kind of weirdly rewarding. Now the later models with electronic fuel injection, you really don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's just pretty much set and forget. Although they can have fuel and ignition issues, they can have, fuel pump failures and injector complications, and the ignition systems can fail too, the coils and spark plugs and things. So they're not bulletproof, but they are way less maintenance. And when those things fail, it's not because of an inherent problem with the car, it's just typically just old car things. Now all of the engines in these are prone to oil leaks from the valve cover, and quite often the rear main and front crankshaft seals as well. Again, although any car of this age is highly likely to have oil leaks, so we can't really blame it too much. And yes, they are all at the age now where the cooling system is going to need some TLC, the radiator and all the hoses. It's probably all on its last legs, and it's most likely going to need some of that replacing. Back in the day, these things were prone to crack exhaust manifolds, and then most people just opted to put a set of aftermarket headers on them. So yeah, overall, mechanically speaking, there's no one real big issue that takes them out. However, it's really how they've been driven and how they've been maintained and how they've been modified, because let's face it, most of them have been modified. And the old age, they're going to be the contributing factors to reliability here. And as for the general driveline, look, all of that stuff is pretty good. Maintenance is a big factor here, and how it's been driven. A bit of mechanical sympathy goes a long way here. But overall, if it's been cared for and not flogged off-road, most of that stuff is pretty good. Now I want to talk about a problem that a lot of owners experience. It's basically when you drive these things, they are prone to tram lining, and they get a lot of steering shakes, and people like to call it the death wobbles. Now there are a lot of causes for that. You can have swivel housing bearing issues, they can be worn out basically. If the car's been raised, that has changed the steering geometry, and it's the caster that has the greatest effect here, and basically just sets up this steering oscillation, which it's really difficult to get rid of. There are a lot of theories on how to fix this. Obviously swivel housing bearings, steering dampeners can help, and the caster adjustment is probably the main one too. But having said that, I've seen owners throw all of that at the cars, all new stuff. They've tried different wheel offsets and different tyre combinations and different wheel alignment specs, and never actually get rid of it. So basically, if you have one, yeah, good luck with that.
But we still haven't answered the big question, should you buy one of these things? Well, no, of course not. Logically, you should not do that. But then you've got to ask yourself, when has making the logical decision ever been fun? Sure, the levels of safety are potentially terrifying, and chances are at this age it will require serious enthusiast levels of care and attention, and a horse and cart might offer a more refined driving experience, but that's all missing the point of the Sierra. Look, don't think of buying a used Sierra in the normal realms of buying your typical used car. Think of it as buying a device that's just going to bring fun and enjoyment to your life and to everyone around you. We also probably wouldn't recommend one of these as your one and only daily driver, because the novelty will wear off pretty quickly. But as a thing to have fun with on occasions, this absolutely nails it. But then again, so does this. But if you weren't to buy one of these or one of these, what would you actually buy instead? Because not much else can kind of do what these can do. It's awesome. Because I don't think very rarely cleaned or polished, you can expect the truck behind you to ruin the tape.